Hi everyone. This week we're looking at another text by McLuhan called "The Medium is the Massage." And no, that's not a typo. It is, rather than "the medium is the message," it is "the medium is the massage." This is a book that is quite unusual, as you'll find when you read through it. It was published over 4 decades ago, and it's quite ahead of its time, in that the book is constructed much like many modern blogs or even social media sites today, where images and texts are intertwined in ways that make us think quite differently about the messages that we're receiving. In many ways, the book is more like a collage than a scholarly text, yet it contains profound messages about the nature of the media and how we perceive it. So we're fairly accustomed to nearly all media information being presented to us this way, but as a scholarly book, this is still quite unconventional during the time that it was published. Okay, so last week we read "The Medium is the Message" from the book Understanding Media by Marshall McLuhan. So just to recap about what the main thesis was of the book that we read last week. In it, McLuhan argues that the medium is a technology that has a social effect on us. It basically influences us and reflects upon us. Okay, so in this book, McLuhan declares the medium is the message. Why does he declare that? Well, he says the medium is the message because media creates their own environments, and these are beneficial to some messages while being somewhat hostile to others. So for instance, if some people live in a world that is completely exposed to the media, they would have very different perceptions of reality compared with people in a world with lesser technology. Okay? So although both worlds would be unaware of any distortion in their perception, as McLuhan says, all media work us over completely. Media is so pervasive in its personal, political, and economic, psychological, moral, ethical, and social consequences that they leave no part of us untouched, unaffected, or unaltered. Okay. So what he's saying is the content plus the medium equals the message. So if we only look at the content, then we're missing an integral part of what's actually happening in terms of how messages are transmitted and received. So we need to understand these 3 different parts and not either of them in isolation. McLuhan is influenced by a stream of thought within the social sciences called materialism. So his reading of the media is very materialist, meaning that it is based in the material reality of the world. Okay, so materialism is something that comes to us from the economist Karl Marx, who of course is famous for coining the concept of communism, and is very critical of bourgeois or elite control of what he calls the material basis of society, okay, or the means of production, which are the factories, which are, the hotels, the shops, the land, the oil refineries, basically, the people who own those things, the people who own land, the people who own the means of production, meaning the factories and so forth, they are the ones who have the most power. Okay, so McLuhan is influenced by this kind of materialist reading of the world. So for him, the function of the medium as the massage is to illustrate and make visceral how the body, as a receptacle and as a dispenser of information, responds to changes in its environment. So McLuhan challenges us to see how the way that we see things now may not be how we saw them before or how we will see them in the future. For instance, he points out early on in the book that we never used to have this thing called childhood. Okay? You basically went from child to adult very quickly. There was no intermediary time where you could develop, learn, and play freely and not have responsibility. Okay? So this whole concept of childhood was invented. And this happened as our average lifespans grew longer and longer with the rise of industrialization and access to medical care, and also the need to protect adolescents from being exploited as laborers. So what was happening at the turn of the last century was that, there were all these children employed in factories. Okay, and so as our lifespans grew, more and more people started seeing this as exploitation. So there was this movement to protect the very young from having to toil for hours and hours on end in these factories, because a lot of the children were dying very young, and this was obviously pretty harmful for them. So there was this change in the material basis of society. Okay, we had industrialization, we had the introduction of capitalism and modern medicine. And this leads to profound changes in the social structure. And thus we have other effects, such as the invention of childhood. The other really interesting thing that this book brings up is the idea that we are all cyborgs. Okay, so McLuhan is essentially arguing that our technologies are extensions of ourselves. So in other words, we're all cyborgs, right? You might probably think, when you hear the word cyborg, you might think of something like this guy, Bionic Man, right? However, I would argue that you and I are both cyborgs. We're all cyborgs, in that we use all kinds of technology as extensions of ourselves. And this could mean any kind of technology, from the contact lenses or the glasses that you may be wearing, or maybe one of you has, replaced a body part with, a metal reinforcement at some point in your life. Whenever you look at your phone, you become cyborg. Whenever you are interacting with your computer, as you are now, you are also cyborg. Okay, so let's step back a little bit and look at this argument a little bit more closely. So basically, the idea that we are all cyborgs, or that our technology is an extension of ourselves, goes way back. So humans have essentially, throughout time, surrounded ourselves with built objects and networks. So, you can think of stone tools, like the early Native Hawaiians used stone adzes as extensions of themselves in order to build houses and canoes, right? So they were also cyborgs, just on a different scale than we are. So profoundly are we altering our biological and physical landscape that some have suggested that we're beginning to become more cyborg now than we are human. Okay? So modern human life is a product of both human and non-human objects, and how we interact with machines and technology in many ways defines who we are. Okay? So think about how most of you, have a second self, right? Who and what is your second self? Well, most of you have a digital personality. Whenever you email someone, you're using that digital personality, or you could call it an avatar. If you have a Facebook profile, you have a digital avatar. If you have a Twitter or Instagram account, you have a digital avatar that you manage on a continuous basis, in many ways the same way that you manage yourself. So in this way, you have a kind of a cyborg relationship with technology all the time. Technology allows you to do things that you otherwise would not be able to do. Okay. All right. So the way that McLuhan uses this argument, which is quite brilliant, and think, this is way before the internet was even invented. Okay, that he's writing all of this. So he's arguing, for instance, that the wheel is an extension of walking. The wheel allowed us to propel our movement from A to B quite dramatically, right? So the wheel is an extension of walking, be it bicycle or car, and the pen is an extension of speaking. It is a way that allowed us to move from being based on societies that are based on memorization to societies that are textually based. Okay, and that created profound changes in the social structures of those societies. Once you had the written word, that created a lot of power for the people who could write and the people who could read. So McLuhan says, the goose quill put an end to talk. It abolished mystery. It gave architecture and towns. It brought roads and armies. It brought bureaucracy. It was the basic metaphor with which the cycle of civilization began, the step from the dark to the light of the mind. The hand that filled the parchment page built a city. So there's all these amazing productive capacities of technology, okay? But McLuhan and others have also pointed out that technology can also make us lazy and dumb, okay? Because we use the medium in order to store information outside ourselves. Therefore, we don't actually need to commit anything to memory. We just write it down, or we keep it stored in a hard drive. To illustrate this, you may not believe it, but to illustrate this, how many phone numbers do you know by heart? 1, 2, maybe? Some of you maybe none. If I asked your parents the same question, they'd probably say that they remembered a half dozen or more. We used to, before the age of the cell phone, we used to have to remember our phone numbers. You don't have to remember phone numbers because your phone remembers it for you. Okay. So there has been a subtle but yet profound change in our relationship with technology. The other really important aspect of how technological progress dramatically alters the social structures of society is the advent of the print press machine. Okay, so McLuhan calls the print press the ditto machine, right, or a repetition machine. It really was the first assembly line that was created for mass production and dissemination of information. And many have argued that the print press machine is the single most important technological innovation that has been the foundation for capitalism and even for the invention of the nation state as we know it today. Okay? So the nation state is actually a very young concept. We've only had countries in the way that we understand them today as being bordered and defined for about 200 years. Before that, we had empires and feudal systems and that sort of thing. But we didn't have these like very clearly defined countries that were mapped out with all these like very firm, strict borders and so forth. So this is a very new invention. How did it come about? Well, it actually came about around the same time as the print press machine. And here you see an early exemplar of one of the first print press machines that came to the Americas. And the reason why they're so important for the invention of the nation state is because once you have the ability to disseminate the exact same information to a large group of people, that group of people is going to imagine itself as being a part of a larger community. Okay, we talk about this in a few weeks in the reading that we have by Benedict Anderson called Imagine Communities. Okay, so that's basically his thesis, that the print press created the notion of an imagined community. So, printed word creates a public, a reading public that has shared ideals and shared ideas about the world because they're all reading the same text, i.e. the Constitution or the Bible and so forth. Okay, so this print press machine created the portable book that we could read in privacy or in isolation from others. Man could now inspire and conspire, McLuhan says. So this creates the ability to disseminate information across time and space. It organizes these publics, but it also promotes individualism at the same time, right? In the sense that you can withdraw into the world of books, right? It creates sort of the idea that you're a part of a social life, even though you're just interacting with that social life through the written word. Okay. The other important concept that McLuhan gives us is the concept of the global village. Okay, so he really coined this term. So he describes how the globe has been contracted into a global village through the use of electronic technology. So the way that this works is that now with electronic technology we have the instantaneous movement of information from one part of the world to the other, crossing time and space instantaneously, and that causes a kind of contraction of time and space in a sense that we're all connected. Okay, so think that this book was written before the advent of the internet, yet McLuhan essentially predicts the internet as this extension of our consciousness. Really, when he's talking about the global village, he's predicting the advent of the internet. Everything is happening at the same time, okay? All right, now on to some discussion questions. The first question, it points to the fact that McLuhan and Fiore's book is quite unconventional, right? And most would probably hesitate to even call it a scholarly book. But that's precisely the point. This is an exploration as well as a commentary on the relationship between form and content. So the first question I have is, how does the form of the book affect its content? And what is the larger point they're making regarding the relationship between form and content? So as you're reading through this book, really think about the way that it's being presented and how that creates a different relationship between the text and you as the reader. And the second question is, why does McLuhan now say, instead of the medium is the message, that the medium is the massage? What is the function of the word massage here? So I want you to think about that, maybe do a little bit of digging or a little bit of Googling, and think about the different ways that you can configure the word massage. Okay. The third question is, what is meant by the term global village? What kind of technology does this concept foreshadow? Okay, that's all for this week. Happy reading, writing, and thinking. And We'll have another lecture next week. Good luck.